Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. IT security is a rapidly evolving market sector in which technologies and practices that were effective in recent times may become decidedly less effective in the current environment. Today's MSPs and other channel partners need to work extra hard to stay up to date and to keep their customers safe. I'm your host, Ken Presti. Our guest today is going to help us navigate those changes. With more than 2 decades of experience in IT and cybersecurity, he has a proven track record for driving excellence in technical support and helping organizations strengthen their security posture. He's the Vice President of Support at ThreatLocker, a leader in zero trust endpoint security. Please welcome Oliver Plant. Oliver, thank you for being here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Ken. I'm very happy to be here and looking forward to talking with you today.
Excellent. To start out, let's take a little bit of a level setting, if you don't mind. How has the security sector and the go-to-market around security changed in recent quarters? What do we see happening?
We are exceptionally busy, and we're just getting busier and busier every month. I think the reality is people are starting to understand the gravity of the threats of things like ransomware, and they're exploring opportunities of what they can do to mitigate those threats. And good news for us is that's keeping us really busy. But I just think that other vendors, as well as ThreatLocker, are experiencing exactly the same as well.
And how have things changed in terms of not just on the technical side and the level of business side, but how has the approach to security changed? I mean, it's one of those things where, as I said in the beginning of the program, when you're doing basic connectivity, for example, it works, and it works now and it works then, but you've constantly got this shell game that the bad guys are doing in order to get in. So you've got to constantly be watching, and you've got to constantly be adjusting things to bring in those new aspects. With that as a given, now you're working with MSPs and other people who are working with your products and offerings to make things go to the next level, and you've got to keep them up to date. What are you guys doing in order to help facilitate that, and what do you most need from those people?
Yeah, so I think it's a very good question. And I think that, historically, security has been approached in a kind of reactive way, with detection tools, and an MSP will respond when something happens. But I think the threat of things like data exfiltration and encryption with ransomware, it's kind of flipped it around, and now you can't afford to just be reactive anymore. People need to put in proactive tools and be looking at things like logs to see not just what is happening in the environment, but what's trying to happen as well.
And what are you seeing as the VP of support? What are the most common types of support needs that are coming through the door in terms of what your people are going to need to address and to help others address?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is assessing logs, because one of the biggest threats nowadays are, legitimate tools being used for malicious activities. So very often people will come in to talk to us to say, we're keeping an eye on these logs, we're keeping an eye on the alerts, and we're seeing, let's say, for example, PowerShell talking to something on the internet, please help us figure out, is this legitimate or not? So I think a lot of what we're doing support-wise is helping our customers, analyze their environments and all the data to try and figure out, is there something either happening or trying to happen that they're not aware of? Because that is the big risk, I think, the unknown threats.
The unknown is always the worst part, because it's always what you're missing, what you didn't think about that's going to get you.
Exactly. Yeah.
What about the role and the importance of zero trust? The industry has been talking about zero trust for quite a while now, and I think most people get it in theory. But how do you take it to the next level? How do you implement it? And above all, how do you execute it in such a way where your users are completely on board and not trying to circumvent anything in order to make things easier for them when they're logging in?
Yeah, so I personally come from an MSP. So before I moved to ThreatLocker, I worked at an MSP that's a ThreatLocker partner. And before we started to use ThreatLocker, we were attempting to implement zero trust with things like group policies. And it was incredibly difficult for us to manage as an MSP. It burned lots of hours. And it was also incredibly disruptive to the end users as well. You know, Google Chrome got an update and we didn't see it first, didn't kind of capture that update in our policies. All of a sudden, no one could open their web browsers. So I think when maybe IT departments or MSPs think about zero trust, especially if they've been in the industry for a long time, they probably immediately think of potential disruption. So trying to help educate people into the understanding that it doesn't need to be disruptive is something that I think is challenging, but it's something that has to be done. But in terms of zero trust, if we think about detection to begin with, so traditional antivirus tools before something like ThreatLocker came along, obviously it's a very valuable layer. But just as we spoke about a few moments ago, many of the threats are either unknown, or if we think about living off the land attacks, if I sit in front of my computer and I open Command Prompt or PowerShell, those applications that I'm executing have the same level of access to my company data that I do. So, if let's say I opened up Dropbox and started syncing my company data to the cloud, I'm not doing anything malicious. So the idea really with zero trust is that just because something isn't malicious, if it's not explicitly needed, it shouldn't be allowed.
Mm-hmm. And then one fine day, we show up at the office and we try to get into our data and our applications, and we get a pop-up that says that we're not allowed in until somebody pays a bunch of Bitcoin. What are you seeing these days in terms of the risks associated with that kind of ransomware? And what's ThreatLocker's approach to combating it?
Yeah, so I think when ransomware first became a thing, the big risk was encryption, and maybe if you didn't have a backup. But the easy solution would be to just restore from a backup and then kind of move on. But I would say now the kind of incredible risk is the data exfiltration. So let's say a malicious person did use something like Dropbox or Box, or even something simple like Robocopy. So an antivirus wouldn't necessarily care about that. And they take all my data, then all of a sudden encryption is kind of the last thing I'm worried about, because all of a sudden my company information and my customer information is in the cloud in the hands of someone that obviously we can't trust. And even if you pay the ransom, like the chances are that data is going to be sold anyway. So I would say the risk to businesses is all of that confidential proprietary data being taken out of the organization and put somewhere else, basically.
Would you say that the right answer is always to not pay the ransomware, or is there a gray area involved, and where would you measure that gray area?
Yeah, so my personal opinion is don't pay the ransom, never pay the ransom, because essentially we're just funding organized crime. But at the same time, if let's say we have a small business, they may feel like that is their only option. If, for example, if they maybe haven't got backups, or if they have such sensitive data that if it is leaked, it would just destroy their business. So I think some people feel, rightly or wrongly, that there is no other choice. But I would personally lean towards saying, we should not be paying the ransom.
Okay. To what extent are victims of ransomware, the people that you come into contact with anyway, are they generally surprised that they got hit with this? I mean, there was a predisposition toward thinking that this was always something that just happened to major enterprises. But that's obviously not necessarily true based on some of the names that you hear about. What are their reactions, and what are they asking of you other than to help them out? I mean, what are you doing to help them remain safe in the future and to help them look at this in a different, more equitable way based on the threat involved?
Yeah, I would say that nowadays, everybody knows what ransomware is, and everybody knows it's a threat, and everyone knows it's a legitimate threat for them. But when it does happen, it is surprising for them. And I think it can be incredibly damaging, not just for the business, but on a personal level as well, the amount of stress that it creates. And unfortunately, we sell to many people that come to us because they had ransomware, they want to make sure that it doesn't happen again. But equally, I was watching the news only last week, and there was a company in England that was 150 years old that went out of business because of ransomware. So it's obviously it's a terrible thing, but it's also just so damaging on a not just on the business level, but on a personal level as well. It can really destroy lives in terms of people's livelihood and income and things like that.
Right. So let's shift, if you will, to the Threat Locker solution and what you
Yeah.
guys are bringing to the table. And also, I want to add into that question, what is the role of the MSP and the channel partner in facilitating all of that? And what are some of the things they can do to add value, be it in terms of bundling additional services or anything along those lines?
Yeah. So when I used to work at an MSP, before ransomware was a big thing, we may have different levels of security packages. So you may have an antivirus, and then we could bundle in maybe email security and maybe additional backup options. But I think we're at the stage now with regards to the threat landscape that the a la carte thing for security just it can't be an option anymore, because not only is it putting the customer at risk if we give them the choice to say yes or no to something that's an extra few dollars a month, but it's also putting the MSP at risk as well, because ultimately their reputation is also on the line, and then the cost of a recovery can be huge in terms of hours and even obviously dollars as well. In terms of the role of the MSP when it comes to, let's say, implementing ThreatLocker, and I think that is sometimes a bit of a fear for MSPs when they look at the product and they think about, well, this could take X amount of hours of additional manpower that maybe we just can't afford. And this is when I would generally talk about how the value of the partnership with someone like ThreatLocker is that I tend to say to MSPs, look at us as an extension of your team. We're not just here to sell you the product and then it's up to you to kind of sort it out. We provide dedicated solutions engineers to MSPs to help them not just onboard the product, but also maintain the product, ensure they're using it effectively over the course of the entire relationship.
A lot of companies make decisions on what to buy based on their past experience, which means that, especially in the area of security, that can leave them very vulnerable because somebody will come up with a very solid security offering and put that on the table. And they'll look at this and say, yeah, well, we've never had to deal with this before. We don't know that we ever will. And that's obviously a lead into a huge disaster downrange. What do you say to those people? How do you get and very often the technologist has bought into the proposition, but somebody who's more in the budget control aspect doesn't quite understand. How do you navigate that situation?
Yeah, I'd say generally, I try not to sell. I mean, I don't personally sell anything anymore. I used to be a solutions engineer here, but when I was demoing the product and trying to essentially sell the value of ThreatLocker, like you say, it's quite easy to sell a value to someone who's technical, who really understands the risk. But if you're maybe demoing the product to someone who just simply signs the checks, again, not to sell through fear, but I think the cost of protection is minuscule compared to the cost of trying to remediate after something bad happens. And if you haven't had a ransomware incident, quite frankly, it's just because you're lucky, I would say.
What would you say to channel partners who are looking to maximize both the value that they give to the customer and also their ability, the value that they bring to their own companies? So you've got people who are watching today who are looking at how they're going to evolve their strategies and their tactics and how they're going to expand their footprint and those sorts of things. Taking what you learned as an MSP and kind of cross-referencing it with what you've done at ThreatLocker, both on the SE side and also what you're doing now in support. What would you be doing right now to take your MSP business to the next level?
Yeah, so I think if I kind of started an MSP now, or if I was able to go back in time knowing what I know now, the first thing I would do is leverage my vendor relationships. So, for example, with ThreatLocker, I wouldn't just buy ThreatLocker and then carry on. I'd leverage ThreatLocker for to help with marketing, and this is the same with other vendors as well. I'd be calling on them to, hey, I want to sell your product. How can I market it? Can you help me with marketing materials? Can you demo the product on my behalf to a customer? So definitely leverage your partners, consume their time and their expertise, because ultimately, we are the product experts when it comes to ThreatLocker. So if you want to sell ThreatLocker, leverage us to help you do that. With regards to generally, sorry, carry on.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say generally as an MSP, if I were to go back in time or start my own one, again, the whole, like we started at the beginning of the call, instead of being just reactive, like I'll talk to my customer when they phone me because something's broken, things like QBRs. So showing value through gathering all the data from the different tools that you have, talking to them about new security trends and things like that, because they will see a lot of value in the QBRs. And I think it shows value in terms of this is the work we're putting in for you behind the scenes. And also it will work as a sales tool as well to layer on more products and more services.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of ThreatLocker, what would you say are some of the things about your partner program that you consider to be differentiators against the competition?
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is, going back to the accessibility of a solutions engineer. So I still have customers from when I was a solutions engineer that I meet with weekly, and they've been customers for 3 years now. So I would say the accessibility of having an engineering product expert available to meet you, let's say once a week. In my experience at an MSP, that's pretty unusual, because usually kind of after the sales process, you're reliant on support. And then finally, with support that is my responsibility, we'll respond within 60 seconds on a live chat based here in Orlando. And then we will offer Zoom sessions as well, and we'll record them and send the customer the recording afterwards to kind of empower them to manage the product independently going forward. So yeah, I would say the 24-hour, 60-second response time of support is pretty unheard of in the industry. And then the accessibility of a dedicated engineer as well.
Excellent. So Oliver, we've covered a lot of ground in the last few minutes. What would you say if there was one thing that you really wanted to underscore, or if there was a question that maybe I wasn't smart enough to ask, what would you say that you want to bring out to the listeners that should be their key takeaway after watching this video?
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is the role of zero trust is kind of critical, and it's almost like we're getting to the stage where there's no choice now. We should only be trusting what we explicitly need, and we should be denying everything else by default, because automatically that means you're not going to allow malware to execute or ransomware. And that's just the first layer of the strategy, and I'd say ThreatLocker as a product as well, because once you've defined these are the applications that should be running in my environment, we should be going deeper than that as well. These are my permitted applications, but what should they be allowed to do? So I'm sitting in front of my computer now, and I've got some network shares. So in a kind of standard environment, that means that any application that I execute on my machine has access to all that data that I do as well. So I would start to question, does my web browser need to access my accounting database? Or does Microsoft Office need to talk to PowerShell? And does PowerShell need to talk to the internet? Things like that. And that's what we call ring fencing. So first layer is define what you need. The second layer would be, well, out of those things that we need, what do they need to do? And should they be doing what they're currently doing? And then finally, something we didn't touch on, but I think is very critical, is local admin permissions and elevated permissions for people that don't need it. A very common thing we come across is maybe I've got one application on my computer that I have to run as admin, because if I don't run it as admin, it doesn't work properly. So generally the compromise would be to either put someone in the admin's group or give someone a password that they could use when they need to. However, the correct approach should be, well, let's elevate that individual application and control what it can do from like a lateral movement perspective. But nothing else on that machine should be allowed to run as administrator. So I would say, zero trust should not just be applied to like which application should run and which application shouldn't, but we should go down to the actual user level and even the network level as well.
So it's an ongoing concern that needs to be optimized and adjusted over time to suit both the threats and the uses being in place, the uses put in place by the end customer. Oliver Plant, Vice President of Support at ThreatLocker, thank you for being here today. And everyone who's logged in, thank you as well for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you, Ken.